I'm Valencia, caught in the crossfire between two clans. Roman used to be my rock, but now trapped behind enemy lines. I'm up against my mother's schemes and Roman's betrayal. Can I trust him or do I have to fight alone? 𝐿𝐥𝐵 for hours all I heard was shuffling, movement, yelling, talking. I paced back and forth in the tent I was in. I could see the reflection of the guards positioned all around, just waiting for the moment I tried to make a run for it. I wanted to panic but I couldn't. I felt jump-started. Tristan was in trouble. They had hurt Tristan and he was in pain. I needed to stop that pain. All my fear about what could have happened to Raphael, Nia and the others needed to go away. I didn't want to act like they didn't matter. They had risked everything by coming here with me. But right now I needed to go into survival mode. Even though when I thought about Ornyx's order, I just wanted to crawl into myself and weep when I thought about all the pain Tristan must have been going through. They already took his foot. I hated to wonder what else they might have done to him. I needed to get him out. The tent door was suddenly pushed open. I backed away quickly thinking Ornyx was back, but it was only Roman. Not that seeing him was any better. I glared at him. "You jerk!" I screamed. He put a finger to his lips as he zipped down the tent door. I didn't care about whatever he wanted to say. I marched up to him and shoved him. "Why'd you bring me back here? Why'd you lie?" I demanded. Roman placed his hands on my shoulders, holding me steady and in place, but I wasn't the same easily controlled crystal. I pulled out of his hold roughly and gave him a death glare, hoping he knew that I wasn't playing. He raised his hands in defense, looking exhausted already. "Will you stop it, babe? I'm not here to fight you. Don't call me that." I spat. He stood up straighter. He leaned back slightly, studying me from head to toe like he had missed something. "Okay, Valencia." I let out a growl and charged at him, shoving him harder this time. He stumbled backwards and almost tripped. "Get me out of here, Roman. He's the one who got me caught. He's the one who was reveling in the glory of having captured me." Roman clenched his jaw. I could tell he was upset, and as usual trying not to show it. "So that you can go where?" he asked, his tone cold. "To save Tristan. He's as good as dead, Crystal." I charged at him again, but this time he was ready. He grabbed my arm and used my weight against me, spinning me around and pinning my arm behind my back. I was stuck as he grabbed the other, holding them in place. He leaned to whisper into my ear. "If you want to survive, you're gonna have to trust me." "Trust you?" I scoffed as I struggled to get out of his hold. I didn't want him touching me ever again. And it was hard to believe that not too long ago I had wanted nothing but to see him again. "All you've done is prove exactly why I shouldn't," I told him. Roman shifted an arm so that it was now holding my stomach gently as he pulled me closer to him. He wasn't restraining me so much as embracing me now. And I was disgusted. "Breathe, Crystal." He spoke gently. I wanted to hit him, scratch him, hurt him. I wanted him to feel the pain of betrayal that I had gotten from him. But for some reason I felt myself get weak. The anger and frustration was choking me, and I just wanted to fall to the ground and cry. I didn't like feeling this hopeless and powerless. "Screw you," I yelled at Roman. I heard him sigh. I used his moment of weakness to pull myself away from him. I turned around quickly, awaiting a fight. But Roman's arms were limp at his side. He truly just looked tired. He sat down on one of the chairs. I had noticed that most of the Shadowpack wolves slept in their wolf forms out in the wilderness. But a few tents like this were set up around. This one had one of those collapsible tables and a couple of chairs as well as a sleeping bag. I eyed him warily, wondering if this was a trick. Roman looked up at me. His lips tugged down in a slight frown. "Do you want to fight me now, Crystal?" His tone was weak. "Am I officially your enemy?" I folded my arms across my chest. I didn't dare go any closer to him. "You made yourself one." I spoke. His frown deepened. "Why? I followed all the rules. I kept you safe. You lied to me." I argued. "You and my mum, you lied." Roman hung his head low. "It was for your own good." He spoke in frustration. This time I couldn't decide whether he was talking to me or himself. He seemed at war with his thoughts. "What's gonna happen to me?" I asked. Roman turned to look at the outline of the tent where the silhouettes of the soldiers still stood. He got up and stepped closer to me. I immediately flinched and retreated. He frowned. "I truly come in peace." He spoke holding his hands up. He then dug into the pockets of his cargo pants and brought out a berry granola bar. My eyes immediately widened at it and I knew he could tell exactly what he was doing. You always get cranky when you're hungry. He spoke, trying to give me a small smile that took me back to the Roman I actually knew. He reached out and handed me the bar. I took it, my stomach doing the thinking for me as I ripped it open and immediately indulged. I let out a moan, not realizing how much I had needed this. Roman chuckled. "Whoa there, you're gonna give people the wrong idea." He spoke. I glared at him. Did he really think one lousy granola bar fixed all the damage that he had done? Roman's face dropped when he saw that I wasn't having it. He gestured for me to come closer. He pointed at his ear, then the guards. I immediately knew what he was saying. They could hear us. Roman sat down on the sleeping bag and patted the spot next to him. I reluctantly obeyed, taking a seat beside him. Before, just being around him made me relax. Now I was on edge, scared of what he might do. "I don't think Ornyx is going to do anything to hurt you. At least not yet." Roman's tone was so low, barely a whisper. If I wasn't a werewolf, I wouldn't have been able to pick up a word he said. He looked around cautiously. "You're his heir. And with Teresa vouching for you, you're safe for now. But if you don't fall in line, don't swear allegiance to him." Roman stopped himself as if he didn't even want to think about what would happen. I clenched my fist. "I'm never swearing allegiance to that psycho." I kept my voice low, but deep down I didn't care if he or anyone else heard or not. Roman frowned like he was afraid I would say that. "Do you even know what's at stake?" "My life. If Ornyx kills me, that says everything about who he is. And who do you think will care at the end of the day?" Roman hissed at me. "You're playing the rebel when the smart thing is to play the ally. The Silvercrest pack won't care about you the minute Tristan dies. They won't accept you. You need to do whatever it takes to remain alive. And right now that's switching sides. It doesn't matter what you believe is right or not." I knew my forehead probably looked permanently wrinkled with the look on my face. I hated how he said, "when Tristan died." Like it was only a matter of time. Like it wouldn't completely break me. "You're the spy here, you might not live by a code, but I do," I told him. Roman looked at me offended. He shook his head as his features darkened. "Are you kidding me?" He shifted and I could tell that he was trying to keep himself from shaking. "I did this all for you. Not Ornyx. You. Teresa gave me the order to watch out for you. And that became my whole life's mission. You became my purpose. Oh, please don't act like you didn't steal private information from Tristan." I retaliated. I refused to be lied to or deceived anymore. Yes, but that was my side mission. Teresa ran the spy project. She raised us, she instructed us. It's taboo to say this, but we followed her orders over Ornyx's. She bred us like lab rats. All we knew was her voice, and her voice told me that you were to become my priority. I looked at Roman. A vein stuck out of his forehead with how angry he was. I couldn't help but feel pity for him. All his life all he had known was service. What my mother did to him and Maggie and who knows who else. They had never had lives of their own. I always saw Roman as a safe haven in Woodfell. No matter what happened or how bad things could get, I always had him. I truly loved him. But now I wondered if he ever even cared about me, or if he just thought he did because I was to be his mission. He obviously saw my mom in some kind of messed up parental way. It was becoming more and more apparent that he was a lab rat. A little pup who took orders from her and aimed to please her. That was his life. He had been bred, not raised. And that just seemed so tragic for a kid. I watched Roman, filled with pity. "What did you do? Why were you running?" I asked, revisiting how he had found me. I knew he wasn't looking. Roman got a serious look on his face. "I'm expendable here. That's all you need to know." My eyes widened. "Yet you're loyal to these people. These people are my family, my kind." He spoke defensively. "You just said they would toss you away in a second. Didn't you say Ornyx hated humans? Newsflash, Ro, you're half human." I seemed to have hit a nerve with that one. I saw Roman's ears turn pink. "What exactly is your goal? To turn me against Ornyx and Teresa?" "Crystal, I'm a soldier, I don't get an opinion. I don't get my feelings considered. My job is to take orders and I've accepted that." I shook my head. "That's not a life." I spoke softly. Roman didn't respond immediately. He looked away and I just knew he must have known how true my words rang. I was going to earn his respect. Roman started to speak. I followed my instructions, I got what he needed. I just had to do one more thing and I messed up. He was going to respect me. Finally look at me like a full wolf. Like everyone else. I didn't know what Roman had done, but I knew that I was right in believing that I had found him fleeing. Why does it matter? I asked, my voice calmer. All the time I had spent thinking if I kept my head low in Woodfell, everything would be okay. I didn't agree with Ornyx, and to be honest, I wasn't all for how things were with the 𝐿𝐵𝐴𝐻 pack. But I knew there was little I could do to change either. The way I saw it, if you weren't wanted somewhere, it was best to go somewhere you were. Roman looked at me with a straight and sad face. Teresa's all I've ever really known as a mother. Maggie and the others, we were raised together. The Shadow Pack is my family. Roman. Family actually loves you. I spoke, shaking my head. Unconditionally. He opened his mouth to say something, then he closed it. He looked at me. Will that ever be us again? He asked. What? He frowned. You haven't looked at me the same since. Since. I don't know exactly when it changed, but it's no longer you and me against the world. I'm no longer the person you'd choose if it came down to it. He sounded so sad, so broken, but he also sounded like he was speaking matter-of-factly. Like he didn't doubt his words in the least. I looked away from him. Everything I felt for Roman I tried to bring back up to the surface. But there was one thing holding me back. You say that, but... Ro, you let me down first. With the look on his face, you'd think I had stabbed him. He looked at the ground. I was supposed to kill Tristan. I looked up suddenly. What? He clenched his jaw and looked me in the eyes. In a duel to the death. He won. He spoke quietly. That's why you found me trying to flee. Everything I had built. I saw it flash before my eyes. The respect, my name, all flushed down the toilet. Because of Tristan. And now has taken you too. There's a darkness that crossed Roman's features when he said the last part. I shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to love him still. And maybe I did. But this wasn't the same person. There was a dimness in him. Anger that had built up way before us. And I couldn't save him. Maybe if we had just run away when we had the chance. I whispered. Roman gave me a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, maybe. He spoke, but there was no emotion behind his voice. It's like he had turned it all off. Roman turned sharply when the tent began to open. There was a man I didn't recognize. He looked surprised to see Roman. General. He nodded. Roman nodded back. Valencia's mother wants to see her. He spoke. Roman nodded. I'll escort her. He spoke. The man nodded before turning around to leave. I don't want to see her. I see that. Roman looked indifferent to her anger. Well, you need to eat. He spoke. He reached into a drawer I hadn't noticed before and brought out a black jacket. It's cold out. Come on, Teresa usually has supper outside. Roman held out the jacket to me. I don't want to see her. I repeated. Roman sighed. He lowered the jacket slightly. Listen. He spoke seriously. Ornyx isn't a man you play games with. Being stubborn isn't admirable. You can't keep playing the 𝐿𝐵𝐴𝐻 side forever. You thought 𝐿𝐵𝐴𝐻 showed hostility to outsiders. These wolves. They hate the 𝐿𝐵𝐴𝐻 pack. Tolerance runs way lower here. He took a step closer to me. So take my advice and play the ally. Could be worse. You have your mum back. Isn't that what you wanted? He held up the jacket again without another word, making it clear that he didn't want any more questions. I reluctantly turned and let him help me into it. He zipped it up, looking into my eyes. I knew, like me, he was wishing for a different time. A time when we still loved each other for this to be enough. Roman took me by the arm, trying to be gentle, but despite what he said, it was clear I was still a prisoner. There were other tents like mine set up. I looked around and saw an array of mostly gray and black wolves. Most were in their wolf state. They would perk up and look at me when Roman and I walked past. He seemed unbothered by the curiosity, but I was uncomfortable. If the 𝐿𝐵𝐴𝐻 pack could hate me for being a Van Cleef mated to their alpha, I wonder how much of a traitor I seemed to them. Roman and I walked for what felt like 10 minutes before we got to the edge of the camp. It was close to a cliff. A fire was lit in the center of about half a dozen people, and food was set up in between them on a blanket. I saw my mother, the fire lighting up her big hair. She drank something from a cup as she laughed with a girl beside her who looked to be in her early 20s maybe. They noticed Romans and my arrival, and their animated chat grew silent as they studied us curiously. My mother got up. "It's okay, my children." She spoke. "Everyone here is a friend." She spoke as she walked towards Roman and I. I saw the wariness in everyone's eyes when they looked at me, but they continued eating and talking, but it was clear that the mood had changed slightly. "My baby." My mum tried to hug me, but I leaned away. She didn't seem too surprised by my reaction. She just smiled as if this was normal and I would come around. She reached forward and placed a hand on Roman's cheek affectionately. "I knew you would find a way to redeem yourself, my child." Ornyx was impressed. I never stopped telling him how efficient and trustworthy you've always been. Roman didn't seem to have much of a reaction. I figured this was about Roman bringing me in. For someone who had raised Roman and had Ornyx's ear, it seemed strange to me that she would let Ornyx banish Roman like that. "Yeah," was all Roman said. "I'm gonna head to my tent. I'm sure Alpha Ornyx still has some things in store for me tomorrow." He spoke sounding a bit down. My mum frowned. "You should stay. Eat with me and your brothers and sisters. The war looms and I don't know when we'll have the chance to do this again." I didn't know if this was a regular thing. But this big happy family my mother was selling didn't seem to be appealing to Roman. "I'm tired, Teresa," was all he said. My mum placed a hand on his arm gently. "Things will get better for you," she reassured him. Roman didn't react. He simply turned to me. "I'll see you tomorrow," he muttered. He then turned to leave in the direction he had come. My eyes followed him. I don't think I had ever seen Roman so down and void of life. It was scary. No matter how bad things had gotten for him, I would fell. He always held on to the belief that he could leave someday. It really only now dawned on me what he was saying about losing something, not being sure about where he stood here. How his whole life's mission now seemed futile. Like he had lost his will to live. "He'll be fine." My mum spoke from behind me. "Out of all my kids, he's always been one of the strongest." I turned to her. "You mean your puppets?" I spat. She frowned slightly. "I didn't raise you to be disrespectful, Crystal. Remember that." She leaned forward and whispered. "And acknowledge your privilege." She stood back again. "Now let's eat and meet everyone." She looped her arm around me like all was swell and turned to her people. "Everybody, my daughter, heir of the Van Cleef title, Valencia." She introduced me with a huge smile. Everyone looked at me curiously. They all seemed fairly young. If I was to guess, they all ranged from maybe 16 to early 20s. I wondered if they were all like Roman. "Say hi." My mother nudged me. I stared at all of them, wondering if one of them would be the one to kill me. I said nothing. My mother chuckled. "She's shy. And she's still getting used to being home at last." She directed me to sit on the ground beside her. I studied all the food. I wanted to fast in defiance, but my stomach grumbled painfully, and I knew I couldn't hold out. I felt someone's eyes on me. I turned and saw a younger-looking guy staring at me. What was it like? Living among them? Did they brainwash you? He asked in wonder. Ted. The girl who had been sitting next to my mother before chided. My mum had filled up a plate and handed it to me with a fork. I noticed how everyone was staring at me like I was some kind of alien. I gingerly pushed my food around on the plate, deciding to remain quiet. Ted's question is valid. Another guy with curly dark hair shrugged. He was twirling something around in his hand, and I realized it was a knife. The Silvercrests spend their lives indoctrinating their young with the message that we're the enemies, spreading lies and propaganda instead of teaching them to be tough. Must we always talk about propaganda and agendas all day long? A pretty girl with short dark hair spoke with an eye roll and a groan. Can't we have one meal where we talk about lovely things? Hey, my hair looks good today. That's lovely, isn't it? Everything about you looks lovely today. The guy spoke as he leaned in to kiss the girl. She playfully pushed him away, her face tinting pink as she smiled. There's a time for everything, Reggie. She scolded. A time to laugh, a time to dance, and a time to totally gross everyone out. The Ted guy spoke with a roll of his eyes. The girl picked up a grape and tossed it at him, but he easily dodged. Children. We don't waste food. My mum spoke calmly as she took a bite of what looked like steak, but otherwise she seemed unfazed by this behavior, like it was an everyday thing. The girl and the Reggie guy started their own conversation, seeming removed from the group. I quietly ate, trying to ignore everyone. But the whole time I couldn't help but be bothered by how my mom laughed and interacted with everyone. She reached over to fix a red-headed girl's hair, and told the Ted guy not to talk with food in his mouth more than once. She was so motherly. This is where she had been when she had left me. Raising everyone here. We've got guard duty. The Reggie guy and who I'm guessing was his girlfriend were the first to get up. See you later, everyone. Teresa. They came over to plant kisses on her cheek. The Reggie guy paused and whispered to her, "Is David officially back?" I listened, suddenly paying attention. "I'll have to discuss that with Ornyx later." My mother responded in a low voice. The Reggie guy frowned. "We're gonna need him. You know, with the Maggie situation, a time for everything, Reggie." My mother spoke, her voice still low but stern. I saw the Ted guy's face drop slightly. Reggie nodded. He said his goodnights before leaving. When the last person got up to go, it was just my mum and I. I turned to her. "I'm tired too." She nodded quietly. "I'll have a guard take you back to your tent, but sweetie." She frowned at me. "You're home. Act like it." I furrowed my brows at her. "My home is with my dad. My real dad. Or even Uncle Victor. Or Tristan. And you have him locked up being tortured. You want me to be happy, Mom? Let him go." I begged. She reached forward, running her hand down my braid gently before looking up at me. "You'll learn to see things clearly one day. You'll learn to embrace your life and your role in all this. You'll be happy. Tristan makes me happy." And as long I didn't know what to say. I didn't see him lasting long with the state he was in and the conditions they were putting him through. If he dies, so are any chances of me ever being happy again, Mom. I got up just as a man showed up. My mother frowned. "He's just a boy, baby. I wasn't around to teach you this, but you can't just live for some boy. Especially when you're this young." I shook my head at her. "He'll never just be some boy. He's my mate. He'll always matter more than most. And if I lose him this way, Mom, I don't think I'll ever recover." I didn't wait for whatever else she had to say. I simply turned around and let the man lead me back to my tent. I was considering fighting to stay awake. Maybe to come up with an escape plan. But the minute my head hit my pillow, I succumbed to sleep. I dreamt of Mikey, but it wasn't a dream. "Mikey," I called. He was sitting forward on a couch staring at what looked like battle plans. We were in a room with a white wall and papers and scrolls spread all over. He turned to look at me, caught off guard. He rose slowly, furrowing his brows at me. "Crystal, what are you?" He trailed off as realization seemed to hit him. "The mind link." I walked closer to him. "The mind link." He nodded. "You must be in some kind of resting state and your mind subconsciously slipped into mine." I nodded. "Yeah, I fell asleep." He nodded. "It happens. You do not want to know the kind of dreams I would walk into before Josh and I learned to control our link." His eyes widened suddenly. "Wait, where are you? Where's your team? You all went radio silent. Did something happen? Did you find T?" I felt anxious telling Mikey everything. And most importantly, I felt like a failure. I looked at the ground. "We found Tristan, he's alive. Thank goodness. But he's a prisoner here at the Shadowpack camp." Mikey's face dropped. "What?" I felt tears form in my eyes. "They've hurt him and they're torturing him, Mikey. I don't know what to do." Mikey suddenly got a serious look on his face. "You're at the Shadowpack camp. How? Where's Raphael?" I sucked in a deep breath to compose myself as I explained everything that happened up to this point. Mikey listened quietly. I had never seen him so serious. "Okay." He spoke. He seemed deep in thought. "Okay." He said again. I have to get word to Josh. We assumed the worst when we didn't get an update from Raph, but you said you don't know where he is." I shook my head. "I haven't heard anything since we got separated. They're keeping me secluded. I don't know what they plan on doing with me." Mikey nodded. "Okay." He walked over to grab one of the scrolls and he stretched it out. "Sorry about the mind space appearance. I've been going through battle strategies left and right." "Okay, look," he spoke. "We got the upper hand by attacking Ornyx first, but his guys recovered quickly. They weren't ready, but they were anticipating this fight. We're sending the second wave in tomorrow, but I was thinking we send in both the second and third. It's a risk to leave our home ground so unguarded, but I think we need to pull in the big guns if we even have a chance." The Union is still on the fence, but the packs willing to fight are gonna send in troops as backup soon. We can overwhelm Ornyx and infiltrate the camp in 2 days max. 𝐿𝐲𝐬𝐬 looked up at me. Think you can hang on till then? I thought about Roman telling me to play the ally. Think I can. I spoke. But Tristan's in really bad shape. You'll need to find a way to move faster, please, 𝐿𝐲𝐬𝐬. He frowned. I knew he was trying to play the alpha, trying to keep his emotions at bay, but this was still his brother. He nodded. I'll try my best. Just find a way to keep him safe. Help is on the way. I nodded. Thanks, 𝐿𝐲𝐬𝐬. I saw him frown and I saw a young boy who looked scared. I mean it, Crystal. He has to come back to us. We've already lost so much. I nodded. I'm gonna fight for him. Promise. A light flickered. 𝐿𝐲𝐬𝐬 looked up. I think you're waking up. He spoke. He looked at me desperately. Stay safe, and my eyes shot open and I found myself in my sleeping bag. Roman was sitting in the tent looking down at me. Hey. He greeted softly. Ornyx wants to talk. 𝐊𝐲𝐳𝐸. The cool water around me felt like a jumpstart I didn't know I needed. For a second I just wanted to be there. Pretend I was anywhere but where I was now. But that was kind of hard to do when my entire body was tense and I didn't know how much time I even had left. I heard someone's feet shuffling outside. I huffed and closed the water. You okay in there? Roman's voice greeted me. Do you really need to stand guard? I called back in a dry tone. Do you want a strange man to do it instead? He shot back casually. I rolled my eyes knowing he had a point. I grabbed the towel he had given me and wrapped it around myself, walking over to where I had set my clothes. We were in a little shed not too far from the camp. It had a toilet and a shower. I hadn't stopped to think how the Shadowpack wolves catered to their air bathroom needs, seeing as to how most seemed to prefer their wolf forms. But there were some buildings scattered around the region. Small sheds, nothing too fancy but solid enough for a small family to live, I guess. They seemed abandoned, but I guess the pack had been utilizing them for some time now. They were sort of nomads according to my mom. Never truly having a place to settle, always on the move. It seemed sad, really. I picked up my pants and felt something solid and smooth. I swallowed hard when I realized that it was the vial still stashed in the inner pocket. I looked at the wooden door as if someone could burst in and catch me. Even the smallest dose could make a difference. For Raphael and Nia and the rest. For Tristan. I just had no clue how I was going to get it into Ornyx. But I had to find a plan. Or at least stall enough for the cavalry 𝐿𝐲𝐬𝐬 said I should expect. Crystal. Roman pounded on the door, causing me to jump and almost drop the vial. We don't have all day. I'm coming. Geez. I yelled back. I started dressing up quickly, carefully slipping on my pants so as to not break the vial. When I walked out of the bathroom, I found Roman setting a bowl of cereal before me. He had also set a bowl of berries, an apple and 3 protein bars stacked together on the small table in what I guess was both a living room and a bedroom. Bon appetit, he announced. I looked out the window. The guards who had been standing there was no longer around. They just took a walk. They're still close by. Roman explained. I couldn't help but think about the soldiers who had been guarding me and my family when Roman had infiltrated the pack. Gone and dead. Just like that. I couldn't look at Roman and think of him as the same boy I knew because of that. So I eyed him with caution as I stepped towards the table. My stomach was actually grumbling and I regretted not cleaning up my plate last out of defiance. I spooned the cereal, wasting no time. Roman sat across from me and watched me eat. What? You're not hungry? I asked. He still seemed gloomy even today. His smile only a ghost on his face. I already ate. Thanks for the concern. He spoke. His tone was dry and I wondered if he was being sarcastic. I focused on the food, feeling like I couldn't get enough. And I guess it was easier to eat here under a roof and 4 walls with only Roman to see me. It felt pretentious and treacherous to eat in front of my mother and her kids. I'll get you some water. Roman spoke after I had gobbled down my food and started picking at the berries. He hadn't spoken throughout the entire meal, and it truly concerned me. I stared at the protein bars and then at Roman's turned back. I quickly snatched one and stuffed it in my pocket. Does Tristan get food? I asked, going back to the berries. I don't know where the question had come from, or if I had even meant to say it out loud. I saw Roman freeze by the sink. He turned around with a cup full of water in his hand. Enough to keep him alive, I guess. He spoke stiffly as he set the cup in front of me and returned to his chair. I took a sip, my heart ripping apart as I thought of the torture he was still enduring right now. "I know you can't see him." Roman immediately spoke. Suddenly, I didn't want anything in my stomach. I sat back in the wooden chair. It freaked slightly. I looked at Roman and he simply stared back, clearly not moved by my insistence to sulk. He knew me better than I would like to admit, so I knew even trying to play mind games with him wouldn't work. I let out a breath, dropping the rough girl act. Maybe if I asked nicely, "Please, Ro, I just need now." He shut me down. He nodded at the bowl. "Wrap it up, I need to take you to see Ornyx." A nervous jolt ran through my body as I remembered what I was being cleaned for. Why does he want to see me? I tried to sound tough and not intimidated, but on the inside I really was worried about what this twisted man had in store. Roman shrugged. "Probably wants to say hey." He muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Ro." He set his hands on the table. "I don't know, Crystal. I'm not exactly in the loop." He spoke. I frowned and sank back. I bet my mum knew exactly what he wanted with me. Her and her crazy ideas that I could ever be part of all this. This place and these people. Much less like I could ever be their leader someday. My best guess is he's gonna ask you to pledge allegiance. Choose a side. Roman spoke. I looked up at him. I clenched my fists at my side. I remember how Uncle Victor spoke about the Shadow Pack. Everyone needed to bow down to Ornyx. They needed to become mindless zombies for him and follow him blindly. Of course I would be expected to do that. I'm not bowing to him. I spoke. He wasn't my alpha. My alpha was locked up somewhere in probably the greatest pain of his life, being broken and probably beaten. My allegiance was to him, and I needed to get him out. Roman looked exhausted as he looked at me. He sat forward. "Okay, what's it gonna take to talk you out of walking in there and begging for a death sentence?" he asked. "I'm not going to pretend to follow him." I spoke decisively. "Not even for a second." Roman shut his eyes for a few seconds, then opened them again. "Listen." He spoke, using his hands when talking, trying to get his point across. "We're in a game of life and death here. You're playing whether you like it or not. A new order is coming, and soon what everyone will be trying to do is survive. Think about it this way, you're just getting a head start." I couldn't put a finger on it, but this Roman, he wasn't as held back as the one I knew. This one didn't have to pretend. This one could be who he really was. And it never occurred to me how calculating Roman must have had to be his entire time in Woodfell. I leaned forward, looking out for the guard. "You don't believe his crap either, do you?" It wasn't a question. Roman might have known me, but I knew him too. Roman's face morphed into an emotionless one. He looked me right in the eye as he spoke. "I serve Ornyx. I'll follow him to the end. He treats you like trash. You serve someone who thinks you're disposable." Roman smiled slyly. I furrowed my brows at him. "What's so amusing?" "Nothing, you're just more confident now." I was taken aback by the comment for a second, but I quickly recovered. I looked at him. "You're not happy. You're not you." He scoffed, grinning again as he picked a berry and tossed it into his mouth. "Yeah. And who am I, Crystal?" I knew what he meant by the question. He had been a spy most of his life. It had been drilled into his mind to never be who he really was. Identify wasn't something solid for him. We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be.
Kurt Vonnegut.
Roman muttered. He looked at me, his gray eyes, which I had once found so beautiful that I could stare into them for hours, looked empty. Teresa had that drilled into our heads before we could walk. "What? At spy school?" I asked. I don't know if I actually cared. But it's the only slightest bit of emotion I had seen in him since last night. "Camp, actually." Roman spoke. I couldn't quite imagine my mother harvesting some half-human, half-werewolf babies somewhere, teaching them to be evil and sneaky. Do you think she's pretending? I mean, it just didn't make sense that this could be the same woman who had raised me. I think Teresa knows exactly who she is. Roman spoke. He leaned in. And I know that disappoints you. But to really know a person, it's always going to be impossible. We all hide. The ugly parts, the weak parts, the parts we're embarrassed of. I looked at him, hurt in my eyes. I never hid from you. My voice was small. Strange considering how much anger was building up on me. I actually thought I could be myself when I was with you. I thought you and me. I thought we were a team. My voice cracked and I felt ridiculous and silly. I was supposed to be angry and tough, but I just felt hurt. Roman looked away from me. And for a second I thought I saw him look just as emotional. He looked like he was going to saw something, but at that moment there was an aggressive pounding at the door. I jumped, but Roman didn't flinch. "It's time," was all he said before getting up. I did the same. It felt like something was stuck in my throat, and for the first time, the choked-up sensation along with the mixed feelings I had been experiencing when I saw Roman felt more clear than ever. I felt like I was mourning. Someone in the body of a boy I thought I knew. Someone who could have been but actually never was. At least yesterday he had tried to make some jokes. Today he was even more empty. I mean, where was the boy I watched the moon with? Had he too been a shell? A persona? Roman took a step towards the door, but he then stopped. I saw him clench his fist. He looked like he was debating something. He turned around and looked at me, his eyes harsh. "I'm a soldier. I follow orders and I always have." He let out a breath. "Keeping you safe has always been my most important order, so Crystal. Survive. If not for yourself, for me." I let out a breath. I don't want to die. But I don't want to live a lie either. And I don't want to live without him. Roman stared at me for a second. I saw him tighten his jaw. I knew that maybe I shouldn't have been too free with twisting the knife into his already hurt feelings. He was the only person I knew relatively here. But I wasn't going to lie to him, or try to manipulate his feelings for me. "Why him?" he asked. I could see the anger building in him. I didn't know what to say. Truth was that there was no answer that would satisfy Roman. Thankfully, the door swung open and one of the Shadow Pack soldiers peeked in. "General, the Alpha doesn't like to be kept waiting. You know that." "I'm coming." Roman spoke, not tearing his eyes off me, as if he still expected an answer. I opened my mouth but faltered. Roman simply nodded as if that's all he needed and turned around. We walked through the camp again. I looked around as people stopped to stare. A mother held on to her son when we passed as if she was scared of what I would do. The Shadow Pack wolves had tougher faces. And even if my mother gave all that talk about how this was my new home, I could tell most were skeptical about that. But that aside, I also felt really bad. They had been roaming the woods since the war, homeless. Packs like the Shadow Pack were known to like living off the wild. So you would think an eternal trek wouldn't be so bad. But everyone needed to settle somewhere. And werewolves were territorial beings. They were pretty much exiled by the Werewolf Union, who pretty much inhabited and controlled all the woods on this part of the country. If that were my fate, I would be angry too. I stopped abruptly, almost jumping out of my skin when something came zooming my way, stopping right by my foot. It's only when it hit my foot lightly and stopped that I realized it was a makeshift ball made from what looked like plastic bags. I looked up and saw a kid, maybe 4 years old, with his thumb in his mouth. He was barefoot like most of the kids were here and wore old clothes. He gestured to the object. "Can I have my ball back?" he asked. I looked up and saw that Roman and the soldiers had stopped as well because of me. I bent over, picking up the ball. I gently rolled it over to him. His face lit up as he grabbed it. "Thank you, Lady Valencia," he called before running off. I swallowed. For the first time I didn't feel sick by the name. It just made me wonder who I would be if I had grown up like this. Among everyone here, I would have been like royalty, being a Van Cleef. Complete opposite from my ordinary life with my parents or my life as an outcast in Woodfell. I would have also been a refugee, wandering the woods looking for safety and revenge. Would I have inherited my father and grandfather's hatred and anger towards packs like Silvercrest? I feared the answer to that. It was easy to be angry and pledge allegiance to someone like Ornyx when this had been what you had to endure. "Crystal." Roman spoke. I realized that I hadn't moved, lost in my thoughts. He appeared beside me, taking me by my arm and making me walk. The soldiers walked behind us. I looked around, the sights getting even sadder as I thought about how they didn't have clothes or running water or school, or even a mall. Simple things Woodfell inhabitants never had to worry about. "What do you do for food?" I asked randomly as I thought about how our supper had been more than decent considering the circumstances. Roman seemed taken aback by my question. It didn't seem like he was going to respond at first, but then he spoke. "We have some ambassadors to the human regions. They have an understanding." I looked up at Roman. "What is that supposed to mean?" Roman looked ahead, not bothering to explain more on the matter. It doesn't really matter either way. We keep some food in storage for when the hunt is weak. Otherwise, everyone here learns to hunt after their first change. I saw a toddler giggling as they rode on the back of a huge gray wolf. Family is priority here. All women and children are cared for. Ornyx knows they're our future. Roman spoke. Future subjects to be indoctrinated. Hi, General David. A couple of girls, maybe around 12, ran towards Roman. Roman grinned and took a protein bar out of his pocket, handing it to them. I'm a little busy, girls. I'll talk to you later. The two girls stared at me curiously before giggling and running off. I looked up at Roman, never even knowing he was good with kids like this. I mean, sure, Hazel and Parker adored him, but he never really showed any interest in liking the other Silvercrest kids. He was always tense and serious around them. Do you think you could have been happy here? Roman asked out of nowhere as we kept walking. I saw a woman lighting a fire. Wasn't there supposed to be a war going on? Everyone here seemed so casual, like they were just going about life as usual. I looked at Roman. The cut on his face wasn't quite healing. Not like it was supposed to anyway. For a werewolf, that is. He still looked pretty much drained of life, but when he spoke, there was some hope in his voice and it broke my heart. What? You mean with the Shadow Pack? Here. He nodded. Here with your mom. With me. I mean, if Teresa had brought us both here instead of Woodfell, do you think things would have been different? My heart ached for a time before this. But I realized that the beginning of my problems, real ones anyway, begun with finding out I was a werewolf, coming to Silvercrest and leaving my father. But that was also before I met Roman, before I fell in love with him. And then there was Tristan, my mate, who I couldn't even fathom living without now. There were the Bensons, whom I loved so much. Kat and Chris, my best friends. If I could erase Woodfell from my life, I would have to erase all that too. Do you think we would still have been, something if we met here? I countered Roman's question. I remembered how much it hurt when he had told me that the only reason he had gotten involved with me is because my mother had told him to keep me safe. I thought about all the times I had spent with Roman, just the two of us, feeling safer than ever because he was there. My partner in outcast crime. Strong and brave Roman. My friend and someone I could say I had loved. Sitting together in parks. Staring at nothing and everything at the same time. But he wasn't my Roman anymore after what I had learned, and that hurt more than he knew. More than I could ever even explain to him. Roman looked away from me, staring ahead. I'd like to think it could always be us. You and me. Ornyx would probably think I'm not good enough for you. The Halfling spy soldier and the future Van Cleef Alpha. I would have had a lot of proving to do. I saw the humor on Roman's face and knew what he was thinking. When had he not had to prove himself? Maybe if you had ended up here, you would have never looked my way. Or maybe, this time he looked at me right into my eyes. Or maybe I would have found a way to get to you still. I don't know much about this soulmate stuff. Or if it even applies to halflings. But I think it's kind of a messed up deal that Tristan should have a claim to you like that. I think fate is for fairy tales. But if it is a thing, I believe you and me. We were never just a coincidence. Roman stopped walking. I did too. I realized we were in front of a tent. It was much bigger than the others, so that was the first indication that it must have been of some importance. Roman got serious again, as if he wasn't the same person who had just said all these things. He nodded at me before he led the way in. I saw about half a dozen men scattered around tables and chairs on the inside. Ornyx sat in a chair in the center, looking as ever as the evil king he was supposed to be. Scrolls and paper were scattered around as well. Plans and lists pinned onto walls. All the activity seemed to stop at my appearance. The men stopped to stare. I froze, feeling self-conscious immediately. This is her. A tall and burly man with a thick beard spoke. Ornyx nodded as he looked at me lazily. Roman bowed. Alpha. Ornyx waved him off. You may leave, boy. I saw Roman tense up. He cleared his throat. I thought I was on planning duty, given my insight of the Silvercrest pack. Ornyx turned to look at Roman. Even I could sense the tension in the room. You think you still have your privileges after what you let that boy Alpha do to you? He asked coldly. Roman was still. I couldn't see his face as he stared straight ahead at Ornyx, not saying a word. You're lucky I didn't feed you to the children. Ornyx growled. Now go. Help Teresa with the women and children. Seems to be your league. Some of the men chuckled. Roman turned. His eyes met mine and I knew he didn't want to leave me here. I wondered if I should have been more afraid. But right now all that burned was my anger for Ornyx and what he had done to Tristan. I wasn't afraid of him. I wanted him to hurt. Roman hesitated for a second, but his fear of Ornyx must have won through. I nodded at him, trying to encourage him to leave. I didn't understand how things worked here, but I knew Ornyx probably wasn't joking about feeding Roman to children. He didn't seem happy with him. So unhappy Roman had been scared enough to run. If he hadn't found me, he would have been far away from here, escaping whatever punishment had been in store. Something told me Roman trying to protect me would only make things worse for him. Roman left. The men continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable. Come forth, Valencia. Ornyx spoke. I swallowed. My voice to say how that wasn't my name disappeared. I stepped forward, stopping a few feet away from Ornyx. Another huge man at the table closest to him stopped what he was doing to look me up and down. He had a small knife in his hand and spun it around casually. Ornyx noticed my eyes turned to him in concern. He grinned. See something you like, Ross? The scary man, who I guess was named Ross, smirked. She's ripe for the picking, huh, Ornyx? A chill ran down my spine. He did not just. Ornyx chuckled. Relax, son. My Valencia is more precious than rubies. She will continue my line. Only the most worthy will call themselves her husband. Besides, something tells me you'll need to face young David and handle Teresa if you want to stand a chance. The man shrugged. I can take the kid. Teresa. Now her I don't know. The other men in the room chuckled, including Ornyx. I didn't like being here standing while they spoke about me like that. Hear that, my dear? Ornyx asked as he leaned forward. I believe 1,000 werewolves would tear each other limb from limb to wed a Van Cliff. How charming. I muttered. But I already have a mate. The chatter in the room immediately died down as everyone grew serious. She sympathizes with the disgraced boy Alpha. A way older man spat in disgust. I held my chin up. Roman's words of playing the ally played in my mind, but I swatted them away. I couldn't pretend to be okay with anyone who would dare hurt Tristan. Tristan had once called me his heartbeat with fierce emotion, and at the time I hadn't understood how he could possibly be that devoted to me. It seemed unjust and unfair. But now I understood. Taking off that necklace had given me more clarity, and now my feelings for Tristan was as clear as day. He was mine and I was his. And anyone who hurt what was mine was the enemy. Ornyx's face darkened. Leave us. He instructed. The men didn't seem like they were expecting the order. Like it was out of the ordinary for Ornyx. But they begun to vacate, each sending me a glare as they walked out. When it was just Ornyx and I didn't dare move. I just stared at him head on. He got up to his feet. I thought he would march right up to me and bash my head into the ground or something, but he just walked over to the closest table. Did you learn much about war fate in that daycare of a pack? He asked in a conversational tone. I stared in confusion. He looked up slowly. You would do well to answer me, my dear. He spoke, venom dripping from his words. I swallowed. No, not much. I spoke. Other than the AAP, warfare wasn't exactly a high-yield SAT topic. Even at a werewolf high school. Of course. Ornyx spoke as if he expected no less from Silvercrest. When you get comfortable, you get lazy. Back in the day, an alpha would make sure all his pack members were all equipped to defend what was theirs. The Union, they ganged up on my father and his father simply because he followed the rules of nature. He was stronger than them all. Power breeds fear. I looked at him in outrage. Only weak men like you aspire to enslave and subdue everyone to prove your power. Ornyx looked at me in amusement. That tongue is sharp. That you get from your mother. He started walking towards me. I didn't flinch. I wonder. He strolled over, his eyes studying me. What did you get from my son? I hardly had time to react as his fist came flying towards me, landing squarely on my jaw, hitting me so hard I fell to the ground. Not his reflexes. I heard Ornyx mutter. For a few seconds my head spun. I immediately tasted blood on my lips. Anger and shock built within me, the pain shooting through like hell. I quickly picked myself up. I wobbled slightly, but my rage fueled my actions more than my brain as I went charioting towards Ornyx. He caught me by the throat. I coughed. He tightened his grip around my neck and started to lift me. I clawed at his hands, growing weak quickly as I was being starved of oxygen. Ornyx suddenly let go of me. I fell hard onto the ground, coughing and gasping for breath as I clutched at my throat. He let out a tisk sound as he shook his head at me like I had disappointed him. Not very quick. Or strong. Well, I do suppose you haven't had an opportunity at training. But you did charge at me. So there is a fighter in you. I guess I can work with that. He turned around. I thought that was it, that he would turn and walk away. But last minute he spun and kicked me, landing my chin. I fell backwards, hitting my head on the ground. I tasted blood and realized I had bit my tongue hard. Ornyx. I recognized my mother's voice immediately. Weakness has no place in Van Cliff blood. I heard him speak. I fought the urge to whimper as I forced myself up into a sitting position. My mother stood not too far away, frowning at me. "Mum," I whispered, my voice a plea. She looked like she was fighting back tears as she looked away and focused on Ornyx. "I came to report that the Silvercrest troops progress, Alpha. We need to evacuate now." Ornyx barked. "We stand our ground and fight. Those weaklings do not understand the might of the Shadow Pack. We are never running again." I saw my mum falter. I knew that look on her face. I knew her. She wanted to say more, but she was holding back. "At least the women and children, Alpha. I can get them somewhere safe," she offered. Ornyx turned not to her but to me. He rose his brows. "What do you say, Valencia?" I spat out some blood. I looked at my mother desperately. The vial felt hot in my pocket, and I wondered if it had broken with the way I had been thrown around. I wanted to panic knowing the risk. What had Raphael said? Even a drop was enough. He looked at me expectantly. "Mum." I spoke again. Where was the woman who never let anything hurt me? She fought to keep a straight face. Ornyx scoffed. "Pathetic." He spat. "She's a defect. A disgrace." He yelled at Teresa. "Are you sure she was Xavier's and not just some random humans?" "She is Xavier's daughter." My mum insisted. She looked at me desperately. "Crystal, your grandfather asked you a question." I shouldn't have been still getting surprised by betrayal, but excuse me for this one. A mother should never betray their own child. Not when they need them. Not when they're hurt. Again I told myself to throw away all my emotions. It wasn't just my life I had to fight for. It was Tristan's too. I had to get him back to his home, to his brothers. My mum had said that Silvercrest was advancing. I hoped that meant they were winning. I hoped that meant a rescue party would be here for Tristan soon. "Screw you," I screamed at Ornyx. Ornyx's face darkened. He marched up to me, but this time my mother rushed to intercept. She was breathing heavily as he stared down at her. "She's a child," she begged. "She doesn't know what she's saying. Her time with the Silvercrest, they brainwashed her. And this mating bond. You know what it's like. She's not thinking straight." My mum insisted. I looked at Ornyx. His features softened. The mating bond. He muttered as if things were finally adding up. He seemed to relax, which in turn made my mother do the same. She turned to me and offered a hand. For a second I just stared at it, but then I accepted it and let her help me up. I guess her time in Woodfell has made her soft. Ornyx mused. "Yes." My mother agreed as she pulled me to my feet, frowning at the blood on my face. "I will train her harder than any of the others. Give me a month and she'll be perfect." She spoke. "Perfect." Ornyx repeated the word as if it carried all the more weight. A mischievous grin took over his face. "Perfect," he spoke again. He walked over to a table and grabbed something. I realized it was the knife that man had been fiddling around with. My mum turned and saw what was in his hands. Her eyes widened. "Ornyx, silence." He told her. He turned to me. "I will not have weakness or treachery be associated with my name." He took a step closer. My guard went up. Should I shift? I'll be way stronger, but he was clearly faster and more equipped. I stumbled back, but Ornyx caught my hand. Then he did something shocking. He placed the knife in my hand. I stared at him wide-eyed. He grinned. "It's laced with wolfsbane. A dagger straight to the heart of the werewolf means instant death." I gulped. Was this sadist going to make me kill myself? "This is your last chance, Valencia. Prove that you can be of worth to me." The next thing that happened was so fast, I barely registered that it was happening to me. Ornyx slammed the elbow of the hand that wasn't still holding the knife in mine onto my forearm. I heard a crack and my eyes widened. The pain made me let out a piercing scream as I felt the bone of my hand crack like a twig. Crystal. My mum rushed over to me. Ornyx walked away, casually letting my mother tend to me. I dropped the dagger as I tried not to cry at the pain shooting through my arm. My mum turned to Ornyx. "Why?" she screamed. He was casually strolling back to his chair and sat down like he hadn't just broken my bone. "Oh please Teresa, it's nothing we don't normally do to our pups. Valencia needs to become tougher." He spoke. "Hold still," my mother told me gently as she supported my arm. "Get her to the medics." Ornyx spoke. "Let her get a splint. Nothing else. She must heal naturally and endure the pain." Ornyx got up. "I'm going to the front lines. These Silvercrests need to see a real werewolf in action." He looked at me casually. "When I get back," Ornyx nodded at the dagger. "I want Alpha Tristan's heart in my tent. Delivered by my heir." My heart dropped as I realized what he had meant earlier. The dagger wasn't for me to use on myself. It was for me to use on Tristan. The ultimate show of allegiance. "If I don't find it," he continued, his tone getting lower and more scary, "I'll take them both."